and welcome to Spaminar, the Society of Props Managers webinar series for live theater prop professionals. I'm Kristen Ward, SPM member and props assistant at Carnegie Mellon University. The Society of Props Managers, known as SPM, was formed in 1994 by a small group of prop professionals in the Midwest to address issues of common importance and to create parity with other production departments. Today, we are an association of 150 plus professional prop managers and educators from not-for-profit producing organizations, opera companies, and educational institutions. We've built an international communication and support network that shares resources, information, solutions, and techniques, as well as safety information, continuing education, and stock. As with previous Spaminars, we're requesting pay-what-you-can donations to help support this programming and our annual grants for early career prop professionals. If you can afford to donate, links to donate will be in the chat. We truly appreciate any help you can give. We have enabled live transcription for this webinar. If you'd like to use them, click View Captions button on the bottom toolbar. I'm joined tonight by SPM member Larry Heyman to talk about how to recognize and identify different period styles in furniture. Larry is a freelance scenic designer and former associate professor of properties design and fabrication at the Oklahoma City University School of Theater. He has worked in props at the La Jolla Playhouse, the Goodman Theater, the Huntington Theater, and Utah Shakespeare Festival. He has also worked as a freelance set decorator, set dresser, and greensman on numerous feature films such as Rushmore, Hope Floats, Varsity Blues, Miss Congeniality, and Pearl Harbor. Feel free to ask any questions you have in the chat, as we'll leave room at the end to pose our questions. Over to you, Larry.
Thanks so much for that fantastic introduction, Kristen, and welcome everybody. I'm glad you could make it. I'm just adjusting my view, so just give me a minute. Here we go. So as Kristen mentioned, I'm here to talk a little bit about how to I called the Spaminar, and I'll show you the slides in just a minute, but I called it the history of chairs, how to look at and discuss furniture from quite a long way away. And really my goal here isn't it's a huge subject, and I'm looking at some of the folks who are here, and I know some of my friends have taught this course, and so you all know it's a massive sort of ponderous task to teach this. And so I'm going to try and streamline it and give some tips, give some tricks, and let you all in on some of the pitfalls that I've encountered in 30 odd years of doing this and of trying to identify stuff. I'm also going to offer at the end some of the resources that I use. And so I want to try and breeze through this slideshow, give you guys some guidance, and then give the opportunity to answer any of the questions that you might have. So let me go ahead and share my screen. La 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 la. There it is. So hopefully everybody can see this. Give me a thumbs up if you can. So this is just the title slide, as I said, the history of chairs, how to look at and discuss furniture from quite a long way away. So when we search for answers, when we're searching for answers as props people, as researchers, as furniture historians, we need a little bit of curiosity. We need some art history. We need a touch of natural history, patience, and a healthy dose of skepticism. One of the things that I have discovered over the years is that there are at least as many unreliable sources as there are reliable sources out there. And a lot of the times there are some really terrible statements that are stated so authoritatively that you think they have to be right. One of the most confusing features is the names of periods. That's what I've discovered. It's also one of the areas where I tend to fall into sort of a weird disparity between myself as a designer and props departments, but also myself as a props person with designers. Frequently, designers will throw out these generic terms for a period, and they're adorable, but they're totally incorrect in their understanding of what they're asking for. One of the ones that comes to mind most recently is Gothic. Somebody asking for Gothic furniture when in fact they really aren't asking for Gothic furniture. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. So one of the things that I like to tell people is that dates and locations, and if possible, monarch names, um, are really reliable as historical movements tend not to follow a strict timeline, and that frequently, historical movements are sort of written on a grid when in fact they sort of wander a little bit. Um, a good example has is I'm going to skip down, but a good example is when people start talking about the Renaissance and they don't identify whether they're talking about the Northern Renaissance in Germany and mountainous Nordic countries versus the Southern Renaissance in Italy, France, and Spain, because the two started at different times. Um, most of the names that we have been taught associated with movements in the art are associated with movements in the arts, including painting and architecture, but furniture periods don't often get their own names. They're sort of tagged on. So we'll sort of throw things in like talking about Baroque, but we won't discuss whether we're talking about French Baroque, English Baroque, Spanish Baroque, Baroque in Portugal. It's all different, ever so slightly. So one of the things that I talk about with students, with learners, with people who are trying to get a handle on this is I talk about looking at the DNA of the furniture that we're examining. Some of the common missteps or things that we weren't taught is that not all historical periods have extant examples of standard furniture. There are some really great one-offs in museums in Egypt and Greece where they have one of something and that one thing becomes the archetype for every single um, historic reference, when the reality is that we have no idea how frequently people were using these pieces of furniture. It's possible that something was saved because it belonged to a king or because it was buried in a tomb, or kept safe, but we don't know if it's the standard. Um, Gothic 1100 to 1600s, it's broken down into several substyles that a lot of people don't discuss: early, high, late, or early, rayonnant, and flamboyant. But those terms generally refer to architectural styles and not necessarily the furniture that's attached to it. So, one of the things that I've discovered is that I will frequently get pictures from designers asking for quote unquote Gothic furniture. And what they're actually showing me is something from the Victorian era in the 19th century rather than an actual piece of Gothic furniture. Why? Because there weren't that many pieces of Gothic furniture. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. I've got an example for you. When you enter Gothic furniture into most search engines and even AI assistants, and I tried this as recently as this morning, the results are often from the Victorian period and not the Middle Ages. And more often than not, they're from people trying to sell furniture. So you got to be really careful about it. And it's one of the reasons, if you were in the room with me, you would see that lying on the floor next to me. I mean, my computer is currently sitting on top of two books. Judith Miller's History of Furniture and Assoulin's Compendium of Interior Styles. But I also have, I'm just flipping the cover. I also have World Furniture and Illustrated History sitting on the floor next to me. I resort to books more often than not when I'm looking for actual history. Why? Because I can flag the pages with post-its, because I can find more than one picture, because I'm not looking at uninformed statements authoritatively stated by websites. Um, there's a reason that so many examples of Gothic styling are not domestic homes, but cathedrals, and that's because that's where the focus of money was during the period. So, needless to say, we don't have a huge number of really good examples of what personal space looked like in Gothic homes. Why? Because the concept of personal space and personal comfort was largely unknown and unexplored until approximately 150 years ago. And a really good exploration of this concept is this fantastic book by a guy named Witold Rybczynski. If you want the spelling, I'll give it to you later. But it's called Home, A Short History of an Idea. And he talks about the search for personal space and personal comfort and identifies the fact that in many of the historic periods that we look at when we're producing theater, personal space didn't exist. Much of the furniture seen between the Middle Ages and the 19th century was reserved for nobles and the wealthy. And so it's really important to recognize that and to sort of hold what we're viewing. I'm pantomiming here at an arm's length. So one of the things that I like to do is I like to view art of the period. And I call this what I learned from Albrecht Dürer. Evaluating visual art from art that is contemporary to the time that you're exploring is a super useful way to get a really authentic view of the world. Now, the downside is that you're having to understand and evaluate paintings, but the upside is that you're getting stuff that's contemporaneous to the period. An example is Albrecht Dürer's engraving of St. Jerome in his study, which was published. I mean, I don't remember how big it is. It's an engraving. He completed it in about 1514. It's really interesting because when you visit the Cathedral of St. Jerome in Lisbon, Portugal, there's actually an oil painting from the 19th century of St. Jerome in his study that's based on the Dürer engraving. So it's one of those things where they've kind of interpreted these historic events. Um, but it's also interesting because you see that Dürer is placing St. Jerome in his period because it's what he's familiar with. So you sort of get this Gothic era Jerome in his study. And the furniture shows us modest, rough-hewn, simple furnishings in a sparsely decorated interior. Jerome's a nomad. But the room is also dressed with objects from his life. And by examining this work of art, we can sometimes get a sense of what interior space in the 16th century looked like, um, even when a search for furnishings of the period um, doesn't give us very much. So here's the engraving that I'm talking about. And you see that Saint Jerome is sitting and working. He's at a basically a trestle table. Along the wall, there is a rough-hewn bench. He's sitting on a stool. There is a very unelaborate bench with a cushion on it next to him. Hanging on the wall behind him is a bonnet that he wears when he's gardening and beekeeping. There's an hourglass. There's a small crucifix on the table where he works. He's got a writing podium, but all of these things, and the cool thing is, you can't really see it from this version, but if you search for this online, it's fairly readily available. This is incredibly detailed. You can zoom way in and see some things. One of the interesting features that's not related to furniture is that the allegory goes that St. Jerome saved a lion, and the lion became his tame pet um, during the course of his lifetime. But images like this give us a sense of what interior space looked like. They give us a sense of what windows looked like. They give us a sense of what types of furniture they might have used. And it sort of gives an explanation for when we look at, I mean, I'm going to refer to contemporary television shows, but when we look at shows like The Witcher on Netflix, or when we look at Game of Thrones, You'll notice that the furnishings that they're sitting on in most scenes are not that elegant. So many of the public settings in The Witcher, it's just literally 5 and 6 seat benches and trestle tables. Why? Because that was the furniture that they would have had at the time. So, searching for Gothic furniture that actually looks like Gothic buildings, that's a Victorian thing. That's not real Gothic furniture. Let me jump ahead to 1665, so sort of 100 years ahead, examining and we'll examine interior with a woman playing the virginal, which gives us similar insight into the furniture style and layout of interior space. But what it's a good example of is when I'm using the term resort to, but when we go to art of the period, we get a sense of how rooms were laid out, how rooms were painted, how rooms were draped and um, decorated, and how furniture was placed. Suppose we conduct secondary and tertiary searches for works around the displayed period, and in that case, we might gain significant amounts of knowledge about how such spaces appeared at the time. Super important. It's what we refer to as um, primary source information. We're looking at paintings that were made in the time that we're searching. Understanding rooms from contemporary period paintings provides us with direct information about the furniture, the styles, and how they were set up. So let's jump to that painting really quickly. So this is, I think it's Emmanuel DeWitt, 1665, oil on canvas, woman playing virgin, or room with woman playing virginals. And you see the halls, the hallways in the distance. We see doorways. We see light fixtures. We see the way a mirror was set, but we also get a sense of the side table with the pitcher and bowl and towel on it, as well as modest side chairs that were set at the edge of the room. We also see that the room is not heavily decorated, that off to one side there is actually a canopy bed, that the bed has fairly heavy draperies. Why? Because this room is set somewhere in Northern Europe. And it was probably pretty drafty and pretty cold. So there were heavy velour draperies that you could close around your bed to keep yourself warm at night. But we also see that there's a carpet on the floor next to the bed, that it's either a tile or stone floor, and that there's an object, either a chair or a bench at the end of the bed. And one of the little secret things that's sort of shown in this drawing, that's kind of ha ha, nudge, nudge aside, is that there's a man's outfit draped over the chair, signifying that there's possibly somebody in the bed that we can't quite see. And there's a woman who's sitting to one side playing some music. So there's a story being told. But more importantly, we get a sense of the layout of the room. We get a sense of the openness of the space. We get a sense of the relatively Spartanness of the furniture and the fact that during this period, the furniture was not very elaborate. The most elaborate thing that we sort of see in the shadow off to the right, next to the virginal, is that the table has a cup and cover post holding it. So we know that this is roughly Gothic moving into late Gothic. So we've talked a lot about what's wrong and how we can make it right, but I haven't really given you much information about how to do the job when you're wandering around in the wild in antique stores or even scarier in props warehouses at various theaters, and you discover things that don't have a label on them, that don't have any identifiers, and you're trying to place them in history. So let's take a look at that. And hopefully, this is satisfying for people. It's a relatively simplified thing, and it's only because I have an incredibly limited amount of time. But I'm going to make some recommendations about some guides that you can use that will help you. And I'm also going to make some recommendations about some of the features that we use to explore and examine things. I'm really sorry. It's incredibly dusty in my house right now because we're remodeling. So I'm a little hoarse and verklempt. Anyway, so part two, how to look at furniture. I often tell students to begin by exploring a piece's DNA, starting with furniture. In biology, we're taught to use Punnett squares to examine and explore traits. Does it have horns? Does it have fins? Does it have gills? Does it have scales? And we slowly kind of narrow things down. You can do the same thing if you look at the legs, the arms, the backs, and oftentimes upholstery patterns or just the scale of a piece of furniture. It will tell us a lot about where and when it was made. Furniture styles are defined as much by how they occupy space as how they're constructed. And I'm going to give you a couple of kind of weird, obtuse examples of things, but I use them to illustrate points that some of my former students who I see here are going to recognize. I'm going to examine separate features first, but then I'm going to look at the overall volumetric features of the piece. That is, how wide is it? How tall is it? What's the seat configuration? How is it upholstered? When we talk to people, and I've spent some time on the set of the Antiques Roadshow, and when folks like Leslie and Lee Kino, the twin brothers on Antiques Roadshow, look at a piece of furniture, one of the first things they do is examine separate pieces of that furniture. This is a really rudimentary kind of line drawing, but I think it's actually kind of satisfying because it gives you the volumes of a lot of what we're looking at. 1675 and 1690, both roughly Baroque period. If we're looking at French furniture, double scroll and reversed scroll. It's not a super, if you'll look at the line, there are curves, but it's a curvilinear line. That is, that the curves are incorporated to make something that is basically a vertical line from start to finish, from the top to the bottom. We move into the walnut period, 1660 to 1730. And then look at some twistings and turnings that happened 1670 to 1700. When we get to about 1690 to about 1720, those twisty turnings show up a lot. So do the feet on the bottom of the twisty turnings, which are sometimes called bun feet. And then when we move forward 1670 to 1700 in different parts of the world, we'll sometimes see what's known as the double twist or barleycorn turning. 1715 to 1730 through about 1755 is when cabriole legs become popular. And if you look at those are the first times that there are actually sort of compound curves being used to make up the legs. And the things that change during those periods are the feet. Actually, the feet and the knees. And when I'm talking about the knees, I'm talking about the top part where you see sort of the curvy carving. Those 1755 cabriole legs are sort of classic examples in English furniture designed by Thomas Chippendale. And we'll take a look at Chippendale's furniture in a minute. But a Chippendale chair typically has a cabriole leg, a claw and ball foot, and carving at the knee, usually acanthus leaves. Um, Moving forward, we've got these various straight legs, square straight legs that move to round straight legs that move to the very tapered fluting, slightly larger fluting, and then Sheraton tapered legs that have the Sheraton Marlborough and the tapered 1780 to 1800 that all have spade feet on them. 1790 to 1810 and 1830, we've got reeded furniture. Is this frustratingly vague? Yes. But if you were to take this guide, laminate it, and walk around with it, you'd be able to get into the realm of where the furniture is once you combine it with the back and the arms. So the legs are a starting point. Another good resource is just a line drawing like this. And it's frustrating because it took me a minute to realize that it goes from top to bottom and not side to side. So it starts with Egyptian, Pompeian, Moorish, Japanese, Grecian, Byzantine, Indian, and so on. Again, Frustratingly vague, yes, but it gives us an accurate, what I like to call silhouette or DNA of the furniture. But here's my caveat. I set everything here aside all the way up to Italian Gothic. Why? Because Italian Gothic, Renaissance Italian, Renaissance Spanish, excuse me, those are all things that we have lots of examples of. You travel to Italy, you wander through historic spaces. You look at if we travel 4 boxes over, look at that top thing with the face on it that says Renaissance Italian. That's actually a scabello. That's a Renaissance chair that shows up a lot in Italy in the 17th, 16th and 17th century. But the reason that this particular guide, as crappy as it looks, as photocopy and mimeography as it looks, is it gives you sort of roundabout um, it gives you sort of roundabout kind of historic references where you can look at something and go, oh, I've got this shape. You can see, over on the right side, the Louis 15 chair. That is kind of a classic Louis the 15 form. Whereas if we look up here at the Louis the 14th furniture, I'm going to back up for a minute, but I want you to take a look at this chair, right? And then I'm going to go backwards and I want you to look at the double scroll leg. Now I'm going to go forwards again. And you see that double scroll leg showing up in Louis the 14th furniture. Louis the 14th is the most geometric of the French furnitures. Straight lines, straight seats, sort of um, elegant, sinewy arms. But it's overall, I mean, I'm going to use the term, it's overall a fairly clunky piece of furniture. These images are great though, because as I said, if you were to publish this and laminate it and carry it around like it's a menu, you'd be able to get yourself into the realm of the pieces of furniture. I'm going to do one more frustrating line drawing, and then I'm going to jump forward and show you some actual images of things. But this is a great example of breaking down the elements of pieces of furniture, because if we look at the very top, and we're talking about Queen Anne. So that's 1702. I don't, I'm blanking on it. It'll come to me in just a sec. But if you're looking at Queen Anne, 1702 to 1714. Sorry, I had to follow my notes. 1702 to 1714 in England. One of the things that you can do is you can look for the cabriole legs. They have both what's known as slipper feet, which is the foot that's to the left there, as well as claw and ball feet. But these other features show up. That little sort of carving medallion there, um, as well as shell carving. The chair backs are often referred to as vase backs or fiddle back chairs. And the drawer pulls are frequently what we call sort of these double mermaid brass escutcheons. Queen Anne is the beginning of it's the very first evidence that we have of wingback chairs, but we also see these side chairs. We see small upholstered sofas as well as settles. We see pie crust tables, and we see these tables with cabriole legs and very kind of dainty um, carved aprons. But if you look from start to finish, you get a sense of the DNA of Queen Anne furniture. If we jump down to Chippendale. Chippendale is a little bit later than this. It's the mid 1700s, Thomas Chippendale. Um, and Chippendale was an early cabinet maker, um, one of the very first um, to publish a book of cabinetry and cabinet design. I'm sorry, give me just a sec. And so Chippendale's dates are he was born in 1718, he died in 1779. So his images are, or his furniture is roughly 1730s to 1760s or thereabouts. But the other thing about it is that he had sons who worked with him. He published, as I said, the very first cabinet maker's guide. And again, we see these features off to the side. His furniture features both cabriole legs and straight legs. One of the reasons that his furniture features straight legs is because he traveled to China and Japan during his lifetime and actually saw Chinese and Japanese furniture and brought some of the forms back with him. So he incorporates these sort of pagoda looking features to his furniture. Hepplewhite, approximately the same time as Chippendale. So if we're identifying Chippendale, one of the features that's very common is this bow back, which I'll show you more of in a minute, and these cabriole legs. If we're looking for something that identifies Hepplewhite, who's a little bit later than Chippendale, it's these straight legs with the feet that are called spade feet. They're basically, they look like little shovels. But the feature, if we're going to backs, with Chippendale, we have what's known as the bow back. With Hepplewhite, we have what's known as the shield back. And with Sheraton, we have these rectangular backs. So these lines, while vague and a little blurry, can get you into the realm of if you see a piece of furniture that has this heart-shaped back, it's probably from or imitating Hepplewhite's period. And that's the beautiful thing is that modern furniture makers love to imitate these periods. So you'll frequently find modern office furniture that's designed to look like these periods. In the United States, the likelihood of finding an actual Chippendale, Hepplewhite, or Sheraton chair in an antique store is like less than 10%. You might, but it's probably either a fake or um, or something that's modern. So now we jump down to French Provincial. And these, I'm just going to jump through this because I want to move to the next slide and talk a little bit about it. But um, again, if you just sort of use the guideline as you move through, use this as sort of your shape thing. Does it have cabriole legs? Does it have claw and ball feet? Does it have a bow back? Does it have upholstery? Does it have a skirt? Is it a rocker? All of these things are going to get it into a period for you. Hopefully this is making sense and I'm just not just complicating things, but I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead to the next slide and show you some Queen Anne furniture. Three pieces, they're all distinctly Queen Anne. The one on the left is a corner chair and you see it's got that Queen Anne, this feature right in the middle of the back. This feature is the fiddle back. It, it duplicates over here. These two chairs both have cabriole legs. This one has what's known as slipper feet, and the one in the center has what's known as claw and ball feet. The shape of the back is distinctively Queen Anne. This shape, that sort of odd tablature kind of shape, with the vase splat in the middle, and this with the pierced splat in the middle. We'll frequently see upholstered seats in Queen Anne, and later on in the Queen Anne period, we'll see fully upholstered wingback chairs. But this is a good example of we look at the center of the back, we look at the structure of the seat, and we look at the way the legs come down and how they complete. The one on the far left is a little bit rare because its back legs, I'm sorry, I'm tilting my screen so I can see my larger screen. But the rear or side legs are turned, and the piece that would be considered the front leg, because it's a corner chair, is cabriole. That's an interesting thing also because frequently cabinet makers of certain periods put dumb bad legs in the back because nobody was looking at the back and spent their time doing their hard cabinetry on the fronts. Let's take a look at some French furniture. So Queen Anne's English, this is French. So if we look at Louis XIV, off to the side, off to the left, this is early Baroque. It's called a fauteuil. The name fauteuil actually refers to an armchair that has open sides. This piece of furniture is called a bergère. A bergère is an upholstered chair. This is Louis the 14th, early, clunky. You see, it's got the scrolled legs. Louis the 15th becomes slightly daintier. It really leans heavily into Baroque, and Baroque is typified by really dainty, um, curvilinear lines that tend to um, be symmetric, but be very gentle in their features. And you see that the cabriole legs tend to be very gentle. They have the stacked feet. This is upholstered on the seat and on the back panels. So the first one is Louis the 14th, early Baroque. The second one is Louis the 15th, middle to late Baroque. And the third one is also Louis the 15th, but it's what's known as a marquise. And I particularly like this piece because it's actually in an antique store. It's in the process of being refinished and reupholstered in this image, but it dates to, I think, around 1730. And the cool thing is that marquises and bergères were designed to be a little bit wider. They're almost like love seats. Like this marquise is actually really wide and it's designed to accommodate skirts. It's designed to accommodate a really large profile. So that's French. I'm going to talk a little bit more about French here. Here, so again, in the center, we've got Louis the 15th. And I want to go back for a minute. You see the shape of these backs, these backs that sort of have medallions at the top, the carved medallions at the top. But if you look at the center of the back, it's sort of this weird, softened oblong rectangle that actually has a name. That's called a lozenge back chair. And I think it kind of again identifies the shape really well. So the two in the center are Louis of the 15th. And then on either side, we've got Louis the 16th. On the right side, Louis the 16th, which is into the 19th century. Louis the 16th tends to be much more linear. It tends to be much more geometric. You've got the oval backs, you've got those fluted legs. And again, if I were to jump back to the leg thing, you'd see these legs showing up in that period. This is an odd example. I'm giving you kind of a weird example because this is Louis the 15th, but it's also sometimes nicknamed Rococo or Rococo, depending on who you talk to. And one of the things that it does is it does these odd sort of symmetrically asymmetric backs and legs that aren't really the dainty, graceful curves. They're a little bit more pronounced, a little bit more carved, and a little bit more gaudy because they're leafed. They're encrusted with gold. Jumping forward to the late 18th and early 19th century, we've got some of the English designers. So on the far left, we've got Thomas Chippendale. Thomas Chippendale has these wide-seated chairs. You see the cabriole legs, those are typical. You see that center back is called a splat, and in Chippendale furniture, we frequently see it carved to look like ribbons. It's called a ribboned back chair. And the top of the back is sometimes called a bow back because if you were to take that chair and turn it vertically, the top of the back looks like Cupid's bow. All of these features, the top of the back, the center of the back, and the legs, identify the period for you. Whereas if we jump over to the far right, the fact that this chair is very geometric and has a shield center, shield back, as well as straight spade feet, sets this in a very specific period. The designer of this piece is Hepplewhite, George Hepplewhite. And then in the center, we've got Sheraton. And Sheraton, Thomas Sheraton, is also very rectangular, um, but also straight tapered legs with those spade feet. So hopefully you're seeing, I'm gonna jump way back. I'm gonna just slide back and go to the leg picture again. Hopefully you're seeing that the spade feet, 1790 to 1810, the reeded legs, the cabriole legs, they're all showing up in various periods throughout. And that's significant. Okay, I've jumped way. Hang on. Sorry. My bad. So there we were, three chairs, all English, all from the mid 18th to early 19th century. So now I want to jump backwards in time to something that I said fairly early on and talk a little bit about Gothic. So the thing on the left, that's actually a Gothic cardinal's chair. It's oak. It dates to about I want to say that it dates to about the 12th century, but I can't, don't hold me to that. But it's oak, it's carved. It's got some very specific Gothic features. One of the things is the linen fold panels. That is carving that's designed to look like dimensional linen that's folded. That's a very, very early carving technique. You see how rudimentary this chair is, though. It's like a gigantic, uncomfortable looking rectangle. That's real Gothic furniture. And you would probably find it in the sacristy, in the vestry, in the robing room, somewhere in a Gothic cathedral. One of the other features of this chair is that it's got storage in the seat. You see the plate on the front that has a locking panel. The seat can be lifted up and you can store your robes, your vestments, and other important articles in there. It would have been for a cleric. It would not have been used by, you know, the blacksmith or the local tailor. The local tailor or the blacksmith would have been sitting on furniture that looked like what we saw in Albrecht Dürer's study. So what's the picture on the right? The picture on the right is actually Victorian era Gothic revival. And if you look at a piece of furniture and it looks like a cathedral, it's probably a historic revival rather than an actual period. They incorporate quatrefoil and trefoil windows. They do the pointed arches. It looks like the facade of a Gothic building. Bear with me, I'm almost done. So this is one of the odd offshoot periods. This is William and Mary, named for William of Orange, roughly 1700 to 1725. And we see it in England, we see it in Scotland, Ireland, and later in the American colonies. So how do we identify it? It doesn't really fit too many of the features that we're used to looking for. Well, first, the turned legs. Second, the bun feet. Third, the oddly tall back. And fourth, strangely enough, the fact that they're using woven cane seating begins in this period and persists through the Victorian period. But one of the furniture forms that is marked by this period is the highboy, this chest of drawers that's on legs. And it appears during this period and evolves in Queen Anne and later in the Americas. But we know that the William and Mary highboys almost always feature turned legs, and I'm going to give you a name. The turning style is called trumpet turning. Why? Because it looks like a trumpet. So again, if we look at these turnings and we look at the feet and we go and search just for those things, we'll almost always come up with this period. This period also features the beginning of veneer and inlay, and it also begins the period of these interesting little teardrop drawer pulls or escutcheons. And it's one of the odd offshoot periods, but if you're looking for something 1700 to 1725, it's always an interesting way to kind of incorporate slightly different furniture into it. And now, give me just 1 second. La 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 la. Can't find my mouse. There it is. And this is an example of Queen Anne, but it's also an example of work Queen Anne style furnishings in the Americas. The left is in from Philadelphia, the right is from Rhode Island, and I know that because I know it, but there are some features that kind of distinguish them. Um, the shell carving is definitely East Coast United States. But one of the things that we notice here is we notice these drawer pulls, both sets of drawer pulls. I'm going to jump backwards in time for a minute because I want to show you something. If we go back to this, you see that drawer pull right there in Queen Anne. It also shows up in Chippendale, but it originates in Queen Anne. So if I jump forward, when we see that shape, as well as the giant tall crown molding, the 3 points, sides and center, the cabriole legs, as well as the seashell motif. We know that we're in Queen Anne, and the fluted corners and the more pronounced molding and a few other features, the wood primarily, identify this as Rhode Island. So that gets us through just how to sort of look at the DNA, what I look at when I'm looking at pieces of furniture, how I take it all in, and how I break it down piece by piece. It's sometimes helpful to have a guide like this, Art and Context, which gives us the names of the periods. I say that this is helpful with the huge, giant, yawning, gaping caveat that it's not infallible. There are some things here that are wrong. There are some things here where there are different monarchs who show up during the Rococo period, 1720 to 1760. That's both Louis the 15th and Louis the 16th. So we need to bear that in mind and sort of hold that up. But this is a good structural layout, but it's also about art periods rather than about furniture periods. So I'm going to jump ahead and say furniture periods in their names. There are a lot of furniture periods that aren't actually furniture periods. One of the ones that drives me absolutely completely out of my mind, my former students will tell you this, is MCM, mid-century modern, because it's not a distinct period in and of itself. There's streamline, there's space age, there's Art Deco, Art Nouveau. There are a variety of periods, Danish modern and Swedish modern, that show up in these periods. And it's really hard if all you do is call it mid-century modern because you're basically throwing a gigantic blob of clay at the wall. Victorian and Edwardian are named for monarchs, but they're also made up of multiple styles and revivals rather than singular. So we'll frequently see Elizabethan revival, we'll see Gothic revival, we'll see Jacobean revival, all showing up during Victorian. Frankly, it gets even more confusing when you consider American Victorian, like Queen Anne and stuff like that. It Victorian is valuable because there was a sensibility about the arrangement of furnishing and the design of rooms that was unique. And now I just want to talk about one of my favorite people on the planet in the history of 20th century furniture, and she's somebody who not very many people have heard of. But the 20th century in America, if we're talking about, and I'm using gigantic air quotes, mid-century modern, the 20th century in America. I don't know why I just got balloons. Was that because I did that? I don't know. Anyway, the 20th century in America has a single powerful figure who few people recognize or know, and her name was Florence Knoll. And I love this picture up in the left-hand corner. She was married to two different furniture designers. The first one, I don't remember his first name, but his last name was Knoll. And later she was married to Bassett. So, but up in the upper left-hand corner, it's this great meeting, this great board meeting where it's all these dudes who look like, extras from Mad Men. And there she is in this like Lily Pulitzer sleeveless top sitting next to a scale model. She was one of the goddesses of mid-century design. She took over and ran Knoll Design for a long time. The dude with the glasses in the picture in the lower left-hand corner, that's Eero Saarinen, who designed the chair that they're holding. He also designed the St. Louis Arch, and he's considered one of the gods of the mid-century movement. Florence Knoll discovered so many American European designers, Mies van der Rohe, Harry Bertoia, the Saarinens, both Eero and Eliel Saarinen, Arnie Jacobsen, Saarinen's famous womb chair, which is still manufactured by Knoll Furniture. She actually asked Saarinen for a piece of furniture that she could sit in and get cozy in and read a book in that would be as comfortable for her as a womb. And he designed the womb chair, and there is the name. You can find her, you can read about her. If you read her obituary, I mean, I know it's morbid, but it's like a who's who of incredibly famous people. And she lived to be 100 years old. She was an amazing character, instrumental in Cranbrook School of Design, and so instrumental in what we imagine as modern design in America. So she's the person I like to finish with. And my last page, and we'll make this available. But one of the crappy line drawing mimeograph things that I love is a paperback book. It was published in 1974 and it's called The Woman's Day Dictionary of Furniture. And it goes through the various periods and gives these very rudimentary explanations of things, but it includes dates, styles, pieces of furniture, and the names of the designers. So if you're looking to get started in identifying unusual pieces of furniture from quite a long way away, that's a Monty Python reference for those of you who don't know. Um, this is a good jumping off point. I also use Mario Pra's History of Furnishings from the Renaissance to the 20th century, John Pyle, A History of Interior Design, Helena Hayward, World Furniture, Cheryl Whiten, Interior Design and Decoration. He wrote the first version of that in 1934, and it's been published in multiple, it's now in like the seventh edition, but it's been published ever since. F. Baudot, A Compendium of Interior Styles, really hard book to find, but oh my gosh, the best pictures you can imagine. J. Miller Furniture, World Styles from Classical to Contemporary. And my final piece is a little tiny, thin paperback book that was published in, I think, 1984 by somebody named I don't remember his first name, but the last name was Seale, Seale. And the book is called The Tasteful Interlude. And it's really cool because it's Victorian period interiors in photograph form. Incredibly rare. But he actually found contemporary photographs of Victorian rooms. I'm going to stop sharing right now and put my gigantic melon-sized head on the screen and say that that's what I have for today, but I'm open to questions and I would love to hear what you want to know.
Thanks, Larry. I'm going to switch mine over to gallery view so I can see if people put their hands up. In the meantime, Patrick wanted to know you had that one chart that listed Queen Anne through French Provincial and
Uh-huh.
had some really great examples. He wanted to know what book that was from.
I don't remember because it's one of those things where I took a picture of it decades ago and stored it, and I'm sure I have it here somewhere, but I would venture to say, if I had to guess, it's probably the Woman's Day thing, but I can send a copy of this stuff to Patrick. I'm more than happy to do that. Other questions? I can actually separate things out and make them available in a Dropbox that people can like, that's linkable. I don't know how I would make that available to people, but I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to share my resource.
That'd be great. I think once this posts to YouTube, I think you can also leave some of the resources in the comments.
I'll do that. What else? Come on. Come on. Show me a picture. Ask me a question. I get that a lot. I get a lot of people sending me pictures of weird furniture and saying, "What is this?" And it's like, I take a picture of the back of it. I don't know. But a lot of the times I go through and sort of do my little DNA study. But I also have the resource of being able to drop it into a Dropbox and ask some of the appraisers from ARS what they think. So that's helpful. Anybody? Anybody? Should I call on you?
I'm not seeing any hands raised. If they're being
Man.
shy, they are welcome to put questions in the chat.
Yeah, if you don't want to say it out loud, definitely put it into the chat. Oh, wait, I see three things.
Oh, how do you guide young designers?
Um, how young?
We work with this is from Todd Kulik. We work with college age
So
students who
what
are
are
learning how to be scenic designers.
I honestly, I mean, you really have to. It's really incredibly helpful if the prop shop or the props department has an actual um, library with hardbound books in it. A lot of the books that I describe, a lot of the books that I listed, I'm going to just hold this one up. This is a great one. Um, a lot of books like this are super useful because they have some of the rare pictures. But the cool thing about this is this was published in the era when they paid for color plates in the books. But one of the pieces of advice that I give to young designers, and they hate me for it, is you got to get off the internet because the internet is full of knuckleheads who think they know what they're talking about and frequently don't. And I've encountered a lot of them. So you got to get off the internet. You got to be a little bit humble. You got to be willing to admit when you don't know something, and you got to be willing to search. It's going to require sitting on the floor and going through books and searching and putting post-it notes in them. And if you think that's time consuming, it's even more time consuming to correct errors later on. So, I mean, hopefully, Todd, that's a little bit helpful. Linnell, yes, you're absolutely true,
Yes.
or correct. Antique furniture is almost never stage worthy. I will frequently do things like use an aviation drill bit to drill long holes down legs and insert steel rods into them and do things like that. But in terms of reproductions, there are a couple of frame companies. Oh my gosh, Hannah, I should fly out there and poke you in the eye for that. There are some frame companies that make raw frames available. There are some reproduction companies that make reproductions available, and I'm trying to remember the name of the frame company that I've used the most frequently, but maybe one of my prop master friends here will be able to answer that question. Um, how
I'm
do I recommend?
seeing I'm seeing similar questions from Patrick and Sid regarding how do you approach a designer or even a director who are very set on furniture pieces that are just not the the right period.
Unfortunately, I benefit from being stubborn and having a gray beard and being able to say no politely. But Sid, one of the things that I know Sid. Sid is one of my former students. Sid, one of the things that I would do is that's a situation where you engage your advisor and say, look, I know this is wrong. It's also a good idea if you have resources to privately, I say this because you have to be very careful to privately prove them wrong rather than doing it publicly. To say, look, I know you really love this, but unfortunately, I'm finding this, 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 and this. And I think it's really important that we stick with the period. The other thing to bear in mind, I got into a conversation with a student about I was the designer on a show that I had where I had a student prop supervisor, and the student came to me and told me that the date of the show was 1 year before this one particular object that I would have wanted would even be in existence. And the show's sort of this wild, weird, madcap musical called Zombie Prom. And I kind of had asked the prop supervisor to sort of suspend their disbelief and put the object into the show because it's one of the things that the director was asking for. It's one of the things that sort of indicated in the script. And although I think it was a lava lamp, and although a lava lamp was technically like a 1961 innovation, and the show was 1960, could we maybe like fudge a little bit? So, yes, Wrestler, Lori Harrison. Oh my God, thank you so much. Wrestler is probably one of the better ones that I know of. Juzak is a great one. Um, and Pete, I appreciate the appreciation. Thanks for the love. Let's see. Been asked multiple times. Let me see. Let's make sure I'm not jumping ahead of anybody. So Hannah, one of my former students, knows the story about. Tell us a bit more about the ormolu. But it was a line that I used when I had period styles and decor back way in the day when I was in graduate school in order to stall a professor and get her to go on and on about something rather than starting a new slide set in the middle of a class. I didn't actually use it. Somebody in the class did, but it became one of the catchphrases. And when I told my students that story, they all began using that catchphrase. You've been asked multiple times just to put just to drape fabric, throw blankets, etc., over a chair when it doesn't quite fit the period and when we don't have resources and budget for accuracy. Any suggestions on executing that in a way that doesn't look like a haphazard cover up, no pun intended? It really depends on the period. But there are pieces like sometimes when we're doing Chekhov or something where they might have draped a piece of like some sort of embroidered fabric. And yeah, I think one of the things that you can do is if you don't have a piece of furniture that works, see if you can find an elegant piece of fabric or multiple elegant pieces of fabric to make some wonderful, odd object appear on stage as though it, using silk, using embroidery, using weird fringes. I've used piano shawls on pieces of furniture to sort of create artistique déchèvement, but to create something that's beautiful but fake. But it's hard. It's really hard. And sometimes you just have to throw caution to the wind and just say to the director, we're going to put something not real on stage. It's one of the uncomfortable realities of what we do. What else?
I have a question.
Okay.
So have you ever found the perfect piece of furniture for a show and then found out that what they need it to do is completely different from what it is? For example, we get a lot of directors who like to see levels and they get very creative and they want all of a sudden two people are standing on this chair that we just got.
Yeah. Yeah, I that's I am brutal at times in meetings because one of the questions that I ask is, do you stand on furniture in your home? Like, have you ever stood on furniture to make a point about something? I don't understand why that's a dramatic feature of
Mhm.
anything other than a musical. There are musicals, like Crazy for You, where the cowboys all get up on a table and do some weird, stupid cowboy dance. And that's me using pejoratives because I had a bad experience with that show. But yeah, yes. The answer to that question is yes, it happens quite frequently. And one of the other things that happens, and my former students will recognize this, is opera directors love for chaise longue chairs. Um,
Hmm.
we sometimes call them chaise lounges. First of all, a chaise is just a French word for chair. If it's a chaise longue, it means that it's a long chair. It's a day bed. They existed in period style for like 25 minutes. I mean, I'm being facetious, but they were not a huge feature of French design. And yet they show up constantly. Why? Because they're a cheap and easy way to block stupid scenes in operas. And again, I'm using pejoratives because I'm a cranky old man at times. But I think that it's one of my it's along with standing on furniture, one of my prop pet peeves is lazy blocking where you put a chaise on stage because you can line a million people up on it and have somebody stand behind it. And of course, the problem that I really run into is in the shows like I'm gonna just name a show, The Play That Goes Wrong, where they beat the crap out of the chaise. If you're not buying a frame from Wrestler and building a chaise, you are going to be repairing a chaise repeatedly during that show because the guy flips it over and carries it on his back. There is absolutely no way that that happens without the actor slipping and dropping it. Yushin has their hand raised, and so I'm going to
Yes.
go ahead and call on them.
Hi, thank you so much for this seminar. I really
Sure.
enjoyed it. I'm a scenic designer, and I have a very specific question that I encountered when I was designing Red Velvet.
Uh-huh.
It's a show that's dated in it's period show in 1830s in Poland, and I had a really hard time trying to find reference image for my prop for my prop team to find the chairs that I needed. And
Mhm.
so I was wondering, in terms of, because we're very familiar with like the English style, the French style,
Right.
but in terms of Poland, like the Polish during the 1830s, that is a bit of a,
It's
I don't know
it's
how to find it. Even I try to find from like paintings, but
uh-huh.
it's very like the resource is just not as much as the other
It's
country or
very
region.
tricky. I'm currently working on a production of The Government Inspector, and finding furniture from Russia in 1820 is like pulling teeth. But one of the things that I will recommend is the book that I just held up, World Furniture. They tend to wander into adjacent regions. And the important thing is, um, excuse me, that frequently the furniture in Poland, if we can find an adjacent region, if we can find furniture in the Czech Republic in a specific period, and I know that that exists because I've spent time in the Czech Republic, or if we can find furniture in some area that's geographically close in that period, frequently we'll get into that range. If we look at Germany, or if we look at the Czech Republic or in Ukraine or other places, a lot of the times we'll find pieces that don't look French, don't look English, but maybe aren't exactly Polish. And that's sometimes one of the things that I do as a designer is I don't necessarily go looking for something that's period accurate or geographically accurate. I go looking for something that doesn't look like anything else. And a lot of times that's what you have to do. You have to put in, or you have to put in, the furniture of Northern Europe in this time period. Patrick, the ever the pragmatist. I know Patrick says if the audience won't know the difference, how important is it? But as a designer and as somebody who's trying to create a unique world, sometimes it's just really important to find something that isn't Chippendale, that isn't French, that isn't Rococo, but that could work. And so it's really interesting because, like, one of the things that I found from a period, I was doing something that was set in the 18th century, and I found some great looking Nordic furniture that didn't look like anything I had ever found. And I was like, wow, they were doing some stuff with wood that I did not expect them to be doing. There are Nordic cathedrals that are built entirely out of wood, and it's a completely different vibe. Do
Well, I think we
coffin
have time.
caskets tend to follow period location rules like other furniture? Um, yes and no. I mean, it's one of those things where, depending on where you are, and also this is going to seem weird, but it depends um on what they call um the place, whether it's called a burial ground, a cemetery, or a necropolis. Necropolis, that's actually a term. Um, it sometimes varies, but caskets and coffins are one of those things that were have been built very similarly for a long time, and that sort of standard Dracula movie kind of keystone shaped thing. I've seen it in a variety of periods, and that's actually one of those things where there's evidence of it in a variety of periods, Pete. So hopefully that helps.
Well, I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions, or if there's any out there. And
So
I guess not.
I'm gonna double back on something that I said, answering Yushin's question. Yushin, sorry. Yoshin. Oh my gosh. Sorry. Anyway, doubling back on that, one of the things that I will frequently tell designers is be weird, be off the books, look for something completely out of the ordinary, look for something that's that's peasant marked. Look for something that is a one-off in a painting. Look for paintings of the period that may not necessarily be Polish, but if you can find paintings of the period by lesser known artists, see if you can find furniture in there. An example that I come up with is, and this is long ago and far away, but I worked on a production of The Doll's House where the designer was obsessed with a Victorian period offshoot called Biedermeier that is a very specific style to a I don't remember if it's Danish or Dutch or what it is. But it's a very specific style, and when you see it, it's like, wow, that's weird. I've never seen any. I don't know how they made the wood bend that way. But a lot of the times you can find something that's weird that's maybe in a museum somewhere. And by the way, museum collections and museum catalogs, a lot of the times if you can go to an online resource like a Polish art museums, I know that the Met in New York has enormous furniture collection and a lot of it's cataloged online. So that is, I'm throwing out a caveat here. That's one time where I don't mind somebody doing research online, and that is when you're going to a museum website where it's been curated by somebody who actually has a degree and understands what they're looking at. So, when in doubt, be a little weird, be a little color outside the lines and find something that the audience wouldn't recognize, and that will save you. Cool?
Thank you so much for your suggestions.
Sure. Questions, comments, complaints? Well, I'll just say I think my lighting is delightful this evening.
It
So
is very good. I was trying to achieve that lighting, but I didn't quite
I don't
make
know how
it.
I did it, but it just happened, and I just my spring complexion is great. No questions, but looking forward to rewatching and taking more notes when it hits YouTube. Artistique déchèvement. Yes, that's a very important term. Todd, you're welcome. I appreciate it. I appreciate you guys coming and listening. And I will say to Todd and Kristen, because I am only a few miles away from you guys in Cleveland, that if Carnegie Mellon is ever looking for visiting artists or guest designers, I'm in the book. So I would love to do it. Sid, I
That's
will see you
fantastic.
in September. Mwah, mwah, mwah. Have a wonderful time in Utah. Have a great night, everybody. Peace and love. I had so much fun. Bye.
Well, thank you, Larry, and thank you all for attending this event. I hope it was fun and informative. Get your pens ready to mark your calendars for upcoming Spaminars. June 22nd, our Allyship and Advocacy Committee will join us in a talk about working with culture and consent consultants. July 20, we'll be taking a behind the scenes look at how we create fake animals for the stage, including fake deer, pigs, and dogs.
And if you've ever done As You Like It, you need a fake deer.
And if you're interested in joining SPM or are a working prop manager in a nonprofit theater, opera company, children's theater, or as an educator who teaches prop classes, please visit our website or click the link in the chat to fill out our membership form. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and on YouTube. Links are in the chat. Spaminar is produced by the Society of Props Managers with got a little tongue-tied there, with special thanks to SPM members Patrick Drone, Freed, Ben Homan, Nikki Kulis, Jen McClure, Amy Peter, Sarah Pugh, Karen Robbie, and Helen Strategis. Thanks again for attending. Prop on. We'll see you next time.